Yeah. Hello everyone. So thank you for coming. Welcome to the fourth session of the Wayanad Resilience series. So the topic for today's session is policies, experiences of disaster management in Kerala and in India. And for the discussion, we have an eminent panel of Dr. Jyoti Krishnan. She is faculty at the Department of Disaster Management at Lola College of Social Sciences, Trivandrum. Her expertise lies in disaster and resource management, social accountability, and local governance. She has also done research on post-disaster livelihood exposures. We also have as Dr. Shekhar, who is a member secretary of Kerala State Disaster Management Authority and head scientist of State Emergency Operations Center. He is also associated with Center of Disaster as Resilience, University of Twente, Netherlands, uh, and also been involved in the Kerala Netherlands Knowledge Exchange Program in disaster risk reduction. The panel will be chaired by our professor Dr. Privna Kodot. Her area of specialization includes gender, migration, and human development. With this, I invite ma'am her to come and chair the session, and to also mention uh, Richa will be reporting for the session. Also, we are also welcome the planning board member online. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Rahul. So it's my pleasure to once again welcome all of you. This is, like Rahul said, the fourth in the series. So we're really going from one to another, and we've all kind of grown, I think, with that. This particular discussion will be about policies and experiences of disaster management in Kerala and India. And we have two eminent speakers. One, the first speaker, Dr. Shekhar Lucas Kuriakos, will actually bring in an official perspective because he's, in a sense, an insider, being on being the member secretary of the Kerala State Disaster Management Authority. So it would be a really interesting or something of a window into how this whole complex process of planning and responding when something happens occurs from perhaps the most important functionary, I mean, the state. So we really look forward to that. Especially in terms of the challenges, because from outside we see it very differently, right? So what is that insider perspective that you will bring here? And second, we have Dr. Jyoti Krishnan. I've known Jyoti a long, long time, and I've also had the privilege of working with her on a couple of projects. Jyoti will bring in a research and also a practitioner's perspective, right? Jyoti's done a lot of groundwork. And I think Jyoti's spent a lot of time really in the field in various capacities, and especially in areas that are on the fringes of development. So in that sense, disaster is something that she's quite closely aware of. But when I was thinking about what to say today, I was thinking that disaster is no longer something out there somewhere else. It's very much in our backyards. We need to think of it very closely and on an everyday basis. It's part of how it needs to be thought of as part of community level planning. So it has to be thought of at multiple levels, but most of all, it's part of our daily lives now. And so we really need to engage with it. So with that, I will invite Dr. Shekhar Kuriakos. I think both of them can have about half an hour so that we have half an hour for discussion. Thank you.
From here? That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Pravina Madam, Dr. Jyoti, Namah Shivayam, sir. And I think I also see Neha. Is this Neha from Kila? I don't know many of you. I knew Abhinav, I guess. He is the one who has had been behind me when I was in Wayanad saying that I should come here. I was, he's not well. So I was asking in the beginning why burden so much of carbon. I would have sat there online and spoken to you probably much more better with my own tools around me. I don't want to give you a lecture. I'm not going to present. I'm not going to also give you what do you call a structured talk. I would rather start with that very first question. Yes, I. You told me that you are academicians and sitting outside, you see it differently. How do you think that you would want to contribute to this? Is it in the policy framing level, or is it in, and as such, Kerala has a policy for disaster management, which is probably little more than 10 years old. This has been relooked at, and we need probably help in polishing it further. So, yes, if you want to come and join us in that activity, you're welcome. I'll start with putting up offers that you can work with us in terms of the larger perspective of disaster management, not specifically about Wayanad. So that's one. Two, we have a lot of frameworks that are being done. For example, now we are starting with a framework for specifically for Wayanad, which looks at contributions, sponsorships. How do we want to use that? We don't want it to be kind of left to the sponsor to dictate terms and go ahead with it. No, so we want to have it structured. There is a policy or a sponsorship framework forming committee that is formed. So some of you students, if you want to come and work within that committee, you're welcome to join as interns. The number of legislative changes that we have brought about in many of the laws and acts that are there in the state in the last few years of our existence. Kerala Municipal Building Rules, Panchayati Building Rules 2019 amendment has quite a bit of contributions from SDMA, exercising certain specialized powers that we have. For example, we have powers to direct the government to change a rule to facilitate disaster management. And this is only non-legislative body which has that power, and that we have done. So there are many more rules and acts that we want to really look at. But given the point that every year we get one or two extreme events, we go into that emergency mode, and by the time we retract from it, there's a pile of other things that will come on our table. So the whole team gets busy in that. Therefore, if you interns wants to join in and come and talk to us about specific acts and rules which leads to climate change adaptation and resilience building, this is also another portfolio that I handle as the Chief Resilience Officer of the state, then that's something that we are looking at. But having said that, there's a caveat. There's only a handful of people who will get to work within SDMA. There's an online application you have to apply there, and there has to be people who are within SDMA who are willing to take you in as their interns. That's when you really will be able to work. So usually in a given year, it's restricted to two. So multiply 80 by 260 students from world over, we get students and they come and work with us, and that's how it works. So yes, how do you want to contribute to that? I will probably start listening to you than me giving you an extempore right away. And then I'll, yes, answer a few of those points that you mentioned about how we are working, how we look at disaster management, and what do we do in terms of response when these kind of things happens. Yes, students. I was never this silent. So, yes, go ahead if you want to say something. So, an experience to go out there to educate people who are living in very hazard-prone areas. Very good question, very contextual. Let me answer that with the incident of 30th July. You all saw what happened in Mundakai, Churalmala, Punjinimattam, Attamala, these three or four little settlements. But none of you would have really focused your attention what happened in Calicut on the same day. There was one place called Velangad, is in Vanimel Panchayat. Velangad had 100 landslides. 100 landslides. In an area of 20 square kilometer, we had 100 landslides. The death toll is 1. As against some 281, which we are counting in Wayanad. 29th, early morning, the district Panchayat president, who is the co-chairman of the district disaster management authority, the Gram Panchayat president, the local volunteers, Apta Mitra, and out of that, 3 of them live there, one in Mundakai and 2 in Juralmala. Gentleman in Mundakai is called Sinsil. Sinsil is a trained Apta Mitra. He had 12 days of training, a kit and an insurance. He's a badged volunteer of National and State Disaster Management Authority. He lost 11 of his family members, but he saved 7 and rescued 5. And then comes Yunuf. Yunuf was the first person to cross the river, or what was then a mudslide, across to Mundakai and kind of move a lot of people to safety. Fazila, a lady who is from Churalmala, had her house half underwater. She moved her family away and then came to respond in this site where the major catastrophe happened. They all went on 29th morning uphill to Punjirimattam and Mundakai, and let alone Churalmala. Churalmala is a very different story. It's a bank breach owing to 2 landslide dams that were burst. But Mundakai and Punjirimattam are clearly known to be landslide susceptible places. And this particular Gram Panchayat had one of the best DM plans that is available at any Gram Panchayat in the state. So every Gram Panchayat has its own DM plan. And this Gram Panchayat also had. And there they have very clearly mentioned that they want to overtime, and that was passed in 2022, and they wanted to actually depopulate these areas over time. Not immediately, because that was something that is not possible. You need a lot of money to do that. And they also had identified and said that these are the areas where landslides would have major catastrophic impact. So 29th, an entire retina of government system, plus the local volunteers who are the first responders, went to these places and told people to move out. We even have video recordings of it. And they went and told, please move. There is some sound that is heard. Some landslide going to happen. And individuals, and we know them by name, who shoot them off. They said, we are mountain dwellers for the last 3 generations, 4 generations, 200-year-old settlement. It's not a settlement that came up the other day. It's there in the 1902 topo sheet. So since 1902, people were living there. No, we have had been here for generations. Why are you actually bothered? You people live in the plains, so go. Then Sensil said, no, I'm from here. He's a local. He said, no, why don't you come down? Some people moved out. Rest of them ridiculed them and didn't want to come down. And some of those who actually came down by noon, when they saw that rain was subsiding, 29th noon, and rain was subsiding and water in the stream was reducing, they decided to go back. One such person is named Maradai. 2018 onwards, we have a plan called Vulnerability Linked Relocation Plan, where we pay 10 lakhs to families to move out of vulnerable areas and go and buy houses elsewhere and land and build a small house. And this land, the original land, you can keep, but then you should only use it for agriculture. So all the power connections, everything will be disconnected. This lady took this 10 lakhs, went and built a house in Mepadi, and she rented it out and was living again back in the old house. So when the Gram Panchayat standing committee saw that she was going back, chairperson said, no, why are you going back? You can't live there. You are not supposed to live there. You have another house, so don't live there. And she said, okay, she returned. But later, she went with her family and started living there again, the same day, despite the fact that in the morning she was evacuated. and was told not to go. Her entire family is lost, including her. This is how it fans out in places where risk tolerance is high, where your lived experience is what you count more than any external push that you give. Yes, there was no forceful evacuation, and forceful evacuation is done only when you have that real extreme red alert situations. Otherwise, there's no forceful evacuation. We always tell. And in Wayanad, on that very same day, across Wayanad, there were hundreds of sites from which people were moved out to relief camps. And all of this, the district panchayat president oversaw. Noon on 29th, Shamshad had held the district planning committee, the DPC, where all the panchayat presidents come. There again, he said, you need to be careful, rain is heavy. A lot of people were moved out from many different places. And the landslide occurred here. A lot of people decided that they won't move and they wanted to check for one more day before they move. Panchayat committee went to the extent that they cancelled a lot of tourist activity in the area. They even sent back many vehicles that came to that site on 29th, and many of them thanked them also. The ward member has many messages from people who thanked them, saying that, no, thank you. Otherwise, we would have been caught in it. So, this is one site. As against another site, where on 29th, when the rainfall was heavy, two of them from the community sent out a message in WhatsApp saying that rain is very heavy, uphill, let's all move out. And they themselves went to the neighbor's house and moved them to safer locations, mostly convex hill plains. But for that activity of the locals, where they were empowered and they knew what they were doing, and they also had a DM plan, by the way. They also had a good DM plan, which was approved in 2022. They saved everybody but one person. And this, I'm talking about 3 wards, together about 10,000 people. They evacuated them, moved them to safety. A lot of destruction in terms of property, but not a single life lost other than this person who thought he was in a safe place. Yes, if you look at that building which got destroyed, it's in a rather safer location, but completely crushed. 2 levels of risk perception. Mundakai, where this catastrophic landslide happened, until we had the Puttumala landslide event, had the longest and the biggest landslide that Kerala ever recorded. This was in 1984. So when I was still hunting landslides in my previous incarnation as a student of landslides, this is one place where I climbed up and had collected soil samples to do certain rheological studies for a run-out modeling exercise. It's many years back, 2007. And everybody knew that this torrent is dangerous. Everybody knew, the locals particularly. We might talk about all kinds of sensors around us, but the best sensors are humans, and their risk tolerance was different. Why the risk tolerance was different in Wayanad? 2019, 4 people died in a landslide there. It's a very complex hilly terrain. Here in Mundakai, it's just one valley. You can actually see right across. The whole torrent is visible. But if you look at Wayanad, it is undulating everywhere, tall mountains, 1,200 meters, and in between people are living in a sparse manner. And if they had not evacuated, we would not even know where the catastrophe has hit and how many people have died, because that's so complex a terrain. The risk perception changed because in 2019, 4 people died, and that whole tribal colony was relocated under our vulnerability linked relocation plan to another site. And they all moved out. So they knew that these landslides could be catastrophic, and therefore it triggered a kind of alarm which people took to heart and reacted to it. This is essentially what we want. There is no warning system that is going to tell you that 2 minutes from now, this particular catastrophe is going to hit you like this, and then now you run at the second minute prior to this event. There's nothing, nowhere in the world, nothing which is proven. Everything is experimental, except in the case of tsunami and cyclones. These are two things for which we have a clear certainty of what will happen. At least a tsunami for Kerala coast is about 7 hours, and for Orissa cyclones, or even cyclones for that matter, that as a landfall, you get up to 3 days with certainty. But all others are just experiments and experiments. Everybody will keep on telling them, no, we have wonderful tech. But believe me, I review a lot of European Union projects on this. Nothing. It's just storyline. Efficiency is less than 40%. That's because the terrain is complex. The parameters that determine where the landslide will trigger is very uncertain, and nobody is able to yet clearly answer when, where, how big, these three questions with certainty. If you can't answer these three questions with certainty, then you don't have a real warning system. Basically, the forecast system. Then comes the warning. The warning is after a forecast of what could happen. Now, then comes the question of why was it so catastrophic at this particular place? I told you, if you look at the social history of that place, it's a traditional tribal dwelling. Paniya community lives there. And within Paniya community, there are multiple kinds. There's one particular tribe that occupied the high hills. While we all would look for a road to run downhill when a landslide happens, they all look for the forest to run uphill. That's why none of them died, and a lot of the civilized died. And this community had been dwelling there for, I don't know, posterity, for centuries together. And the social fabric changed when the source of income also changed. The source of income initially was lumbering. This was the place where a lot of trees were cut down and taken to Britain or wherever, and shipbuilding just in Calicut. So these are during the British time. But even Britishers kept away from some of these places. For example, where this landslide occurred, there was no human intervention after. It was a pristine forest because it's not very easy to access that place, and it's very steep a slope, 67-degree slope. So you can't go and do lumbering and bring out logs from there. And you had trees, trees are of this size. 2 to 3 people have to hug together to hold one trunk. So that kind of trees were growing there. Very deep soils. The reason is that it is a straight line fracture zone. And it produces a lot of regolith material which accumulated over time and developed into 6 to 7 meter soil depth, wherein entrapments were there, big boulders. And all this pristine forest is what actually, from where it triggered. Punjirimattam is a first settlement, or where civilized people would live. That is at 971 meters above mean sea level, 971. Next is Mundakai, where you saw a mosque in front of which a rock of this room size is standing. That is at 968. And Churalmala is up somewhere about 840. The entire torrent had 3 small waterfalls, and there are 17 streams that comes as waterfalls and falls into this torrent. So uphill, if you look at this, people moved in there initially as lumberers and then as estate workers. This place has 2 peculiarities in terms of socioeconomics. Coffee in this area, a coffee plant yields twice the coffee of an average 1 hectare coffee estate in India. It yields almost equivalent amount of cardamom. These 2 crops go together very well. Coffee is a very deep rooting plant. It is very good for the soil. It holds it back. It's very fabric. And cardamom interlaces this. And cardamom loves shade, and cardamom lives in the shade of this. And it also grows. People started with that. Then tea estate of Harrison's Malayalam, which was once upon a time a Scottish area. Another peculiarity of this area is, and why these people came there is, this is where the great Wayanad gold rush happened. I hope you are all aware of it. In the 1700s, yes, Chaliar Basin has gold deposits. Even today, they will kind of sieve gold and collect gold ingots, small pieces. This place is supposed to be having a lot of quartzite veins, which indicates that there is some gold possible here or there. A lot of Scottish came from Scotland, settled in these areas, acquired land from Nilambur royals, and looked for gold. You will see massive machinery sitting atop hills. I mean, you would wonder how they are there. Not here, but in various parts. But this is an area where the Scottish people came, and they wanted it to be looking like, the rolling hills of Scotland. So they beautifully started with tea plantations. So coffee was there, cardamom was there, tea was there. And you can actually see it, that mixing of crops you can see. But as all of you know, over time, the income from agriculture reduced, drastically dipped. A lot of cheap labor came into this area. For example, on the first day of this event, Kerala sent back 300 laborers from MP. We all hear of laborers coming from Assam, Bengal, or in double quotes, Bangladesh, wherever. But we had people from MP here. Cheap labor is in plenty. Because that there are lots of resorts, homestays, called resorts in double quotes, homestays, it's just one house and 2 rooms given for this. They also employ these people from outside the state. So a lot of cheap labor started coming in, and therefore the locals slowly had to look for more affluent livelihood. So they moved on to looking at tourism, because before this landslide, if you have gone to Mepadi, it is really a heaven in front of you. So beautiful. But for this torrent, look at the videos of that place. Well, Mepadi looks like a heaven in front of you. People would really, just the view of coming into Churalmala town and looking around used to give you a very different feel. And yeah, I told you, even before all this, lots of buses and roads came in that area. I went to that site, and even then it was so pristine and beautiful. You all have access to Google. Look at Google. 2016 satellite image of this area as against 2024 satellite image. You will see roughly about 200% increase in houses, buildings, And these are all Pata land. So don't think that they went and encroached forest and all that. No, Churalmala is a Pata land. Once upon a time, an estate, the fringes of estates are kind of given to laborers for their housing, and they have created a small settlement there. A good school was there. All facilities, you name it, everything was there. Even up till until Punjiri Mattam, you will get all 3 or 4 mobile connectivity. But this intensification of activity through tourism also attracted a lot of people from outside, and they also increased the urbanization there. They intensified it there. You can actually see that in Churalmala town. Now, if you have seen that event, you have a board, right? So I'll use that board. Just to give you a screen. This works, right? What else? Yeah. Okay, so let's look at it like a straight line, and you would have noticed it. This is Punjiri Mattam. This is the forest. This is the settlement. There's about 2 kilometers. Then within 1 kilometer, you have Mundakai. 1 kilometer. And then 4 kilometer, there is another river that joins here from Bellary. And then it goes down like this. So this is called Kundapura. And this is called Bellary. And here, from here, Churalmala starts. You have two meanders like this for the river before it goes all the way around to Chalia. So actually the river goes around, takes a turn behind this hill and flows down as Chalia. Here is Sujipara, a famous waterfall. There is one waterfall called Sidamakundu. And there are two small waterfalls here, which you don't actually have a clear name. This river joins almost perpendicular to the stream that is coming. Both those streams uphill received more than 600 millimeters of rainfall. And if you look at the real top of this hills, it's bald rock, nothing else. So every drop of water that you put there is going to come down. 600 millimeters of rain falling in maybe 1 or 2 hours is like a bucket of water being poured into this place and it'll just flow down. Then plus this water is also falling on the soil. It's soft, saturated. So there is a surface flow element and there is also perched water table development. There is a large rock which used to be sitting just below at the ground years back. If you look at the old videos of this site, you will see that. That rock is no more there. You cannot even see it anywhere there. One of these rocks would have dislodged owing to this huge amount of rainfall. And these are areas where you have columnar joints, and there are also, if there are geologists in here, you will also know shear surfaces. You can actually see it on rock bands where the shearing has happened. So it comes out as blocks, pieces of rock. And this came down. It created one dam uphill somewhere around Punjirimattam. There used to be a little bridge that connects to the other side, Vanarani estate, which probably all of you know as the estate of Mohanlal. That's just on the other side. Again, cardamom and coffee, nothing else. It was probably where the first blockade happened. And why we say that is because uphill, you can see there was a water run up to the crown of trees there, which is roughly about 100 meters from the riverbed. That's the height in which water mounted. So much of material with all this rocks and trees and whatever came and blocked it. That breached. That is the first sound is this dislodging from the top. Second sound is that dam bursting. Then if you come down, see the Makundu, that waterfall, look for the videos. Beautiful waterfall of about 6 meters. Doesn't exist anymore. The river geomorphology is changed, completely destroyed. There, a second dam is built. And that you can see by two evidences. One, tree crowns, that's about 120 meters above that particular river Thalweg. And on the other side, you actually will see. And on the other side, you see that big rock, which is on top of or very close to that mosque. It actually ran up the mosque and came down. So these are two evidences where you can see water run up was up till there. And it's just not water, it's all slush, mud, everything put together. So it came down as a water bomb. And therefore, this particular site, when it reached here, the river was to flow like this. It came in here. It also had water coming from here. And there is a process called backwash. It rarely has happened in Kerala. I've never seen this happening in any of those landslides that I've been checking. As it came in, it ran up this river and houses which were here were destroyed. So if it had to run up here, that is roughly 100 meters from here. Think of the volume of material that came in. And that because it had this turn and a ridge, a solid ground ridge here. It had to breach this. It couldn't just flow through its own channel, and it moved in here. All the houses that were here suffered from damage. The school here, the school complex that you saw, saved the Churalmala town. If that wasn't there, Churalmala town would have been gone. The first line of buildings here, though, which actually is on the river bank, is more or less unscratched. So you heard probably people telling that no, we were on that house, 31 people on the rooftop and all that. That's all here. Not here. This is hill. This is a hilly area. So a lot of people moved in here. They never expected when the second dam here breached. That is when this happened. This happened at 3:40 a.m. I was seeing it live because our hazard analyst was there and he was calling me live on a video, and we could see. Until then, they were seeing these houses. They were walking through the school road. Yeah. So therefore, land use. If you come and tell me that you can't live with Churalmala in those areas, I'll definitely show you off. Because for 200 years, nothing has happened there. People were living peacefully. People had their settlement there. But Gunjilmattam and Mundakai is an area where we have to take out people. We have to depopulate. This calls for a larger policy decision or a conceptualization of how we want our society to live further in the era of climate change. This we have well laid in the PDNA of 2018 and also the Rebuild Kerala Development Program, if you look at, where we said Kerala society needs to start thinking of reclustering. We can't let people live everywhere. This is well laid. That's why we have a scheme also to support that. But that's not enough. Because if you want to recluster, intensifying urbanization to pockets would mean so much of resource mobilization that you require. And this is something that we have to really grapple in the state more and more. While we say this, we cannot overlook the fact that a lot of people have emotional attachment to their forefathers' lands. So it's not just about we saying, no, you can't do anything, but it's also about them accepting it. How do you cross over into that emotional plane and convince them, like what some of them got convinced in Velangad, people were convinced. In these places also, some few hundred people were convinced to move out, leaving everything. No? So the bottleneck is there. To conclude, every penny that you are going to invest in land use change and appropriate land use policy implementation, that enforcement of whatever is written down in our acts and rules, it's going to geometrically save lives as against every penny that you are going to invest in early warning systems, which is only going to contribute arithmetically. So our requirement is to convince people it's not about not having policies and acts. Maybe some of it is written, some of it needs edits, some of it needs a relook. But it's more about how we as a society decide that we want to live more safely, and for which are we willing to accept and embrace the difficult truth that you can't live everywhere as you want. Now, last point. If you're hunting for any quarries in this area, you have to look 10 kilometers away from this place. Because that's something that everybody had been speaking everywhere around. I'm just telling you, we did a very thorough investigation on the first day to look for any quarrying activity. And we don't believe that we have to stop all quarrying. That's not our policy at all. We need material. If there is alternate material to build better houses, you have to go around and convince people to accept it. If I and you live in a solid hard brick structure like this, where even our partition walls are made of hard brick, then we can't go and tell people, no, you should live in a rather flimsy looking, they are not flimsy looking alternate material built structures. So while there are no quarries around, the real requirement is where do you want to do quarrying and where you will not permit quarries. No? So that differentiation has to be coming within the land use framework that we talk about. I'll stop here. If you have questions, you can always ask.
I'm sure we all have a lot of questions, particularly related to government policy and, what are the kind of challenges in terms of bringing policy up to date with the current reality. With that, I invite Dr. Jyoti Krishna.
I'll share the presentation.
Good afternoon. The theme for today's discussion is policies related to disaster management and experiences. So from Kerala and India, I think I'll zoom out of Mundakai. I'll talk of larger dimensions and just for clarity, like there is, like all disciplines, disaster management also has its own set of jargons, but just for simple clarity, normally the disaster risk management cycle is divided into a number of phases, and some of them can be grouped into the pre-disaster phase and some into the post-disaster phase. And of course, in the middle, you have the disaster response stage. So in the pre-disaster phase, you have prevention, mitigation, and preparedness. And in the post-disaster phase, which is what we find is now unfolding in Wayanad, the long road towards recovery. So I thought I'll refer to the existing policy framework just for our own clarity, because policy at the end of the day is the state's intention. And we need to understand what the state's intention is and how far or close we are to that intention. So remove the bar. Yeah. Yeah, so the National Disaster Management Policy of 2009, it has several policy objectives. And the first one is stated as promoting a culture of prevention, preparedness, and resilience. Culture of prevention, it's actually quite a complex term. But if one is to have, or we as a society, if we are to have a culture of preparedness or a culture of prevention, we need a very in-depth understanding of risks. What are disaster risks and how are they linked to systemic ecological vulnerabilities? Without that understanding, we will not be able to develop that culture of either prevention or preparedness. So to my understanding, Dr. Shekhar was talking of, early warning signals being given. Some people listen, some people don't. But as a society, that appreciation of disaster risk will only come with an appreciation of the ecological vulnerabilities that I am living in my area. And for that, I think we need very fundamental long-term citizen education. A kind of a second wave of literacy for Kerala, perhaps an ecological literacy for a state like this, for a humid tropical state like this, which has gone through significant land use change and which is facing or getting 90% of its rainfall within a very short confined period of time. For instance, understanding the implications of land use change, understanding the implications of riverbank encroachment, what happens when you disturb natural vegetation, that kind of an ecological appreciation is needed for developing or promoting a culture of prevention. And do we have it here is something that we all need to ask and reflect upon. The then, related to this larger culture of preparedness, what are the material conditions that enable us to develop this culture of preparedness? In the context of Mepadi and in the context of many parts of Kerala, effective rainfall monitoring in hazard-prone areas with community participation, not yes, we need early warnings. Yes, we need rainfall data coming in, but also the rainfall that is measured regionally and then communicated back. Is there a way by which this information can be circulated within the community and they realize its importance? The Kerala Disaster Management Policy of 2010 speaks about the need for setting up multi-purpose permanent community shelters in vulnerable villages. And these shelters could be used as community centers during normalcy. How many such multi-purpose community shelters do we have? Don't we need such multi-purpose community shelters in every panchayat or every ward, especially in very hazard-prone areas? Because it's one thing to tell people to move, but where do I move to? There are many people who hesitate to move into relief camps because they're not happy with the facilities there. It's in Kerala, to my understanding, it's mostly schools that are converted into camps. And in the process, we disrupt both education and, of course, a school cannot cater to all the facilities that are required in relief camps. So we have minimum standards, we have guidelines, but to what extent can we implement these guidelines? So that a person who wants to relocate to the camp is assured of dignified living while they live in the camp. It's like, I don't need to be pushed to go into the camp. So the material condition is also important if we need to develop this culture of preparedness. When I was writing this thing about community shelters, I just recall this issue of animal shelters. I mean, in Wayanad, there are organizations like Humane International who work on animal shelters. Yeah, the needs of animals are often unrecognized during disasters. I recall an interview that I had with a 50-year-old Paniya woman who lives along the Kunyom River in Wayanad. So her home was affected by floods in 2018, 19, and 20. So she worked for about 20 years in the Priyadarshini tea estates. And she gave up that job because she had a chronic illness and she couldn't go to work anymore. So then her only livelihood was the cow that she had and the milk that she got from the cow. So she refused to move because she said, where will I take my cow? So these are things that, all of these matter when we talk of why people move and why people don't move. So an appreciation of these vulnerabilities is also extremely important, especially vulnerabilities of the poor. Another, I'm not referring to all the policy objectives, but just few which I felt were critical. Encouraging mitigation measures that are based on technology, traditional wisdom, and environmental sustainability. Mitigation, as we all know, are long-term measures. They're not short-term, they're long-term measures that are taken up in advance to reduce the impact of disasters. So, how do we view our mitigation measures? As sustainability enhancing measures. A classic example is seawalls along the coast. They mitigate to some extent. But have we explored with alternative options? Have we done enough research on it? Have we pumped enough money and expertise into developing alternative, possibly bio-rich or bio-regenerative measures that could at least partially replace seawalls, if maybe not everywhere? In the case of soil and water conservation, for instance, 1980s was, the decade of the 80s was significant in terms of drought. I think 83, 84 and all were significant drought years in Kerala. So I remember that in a place like Attapadi, following this drought experience, there were several projects that came up to arrest drought. And one commonly adopted measure was soil and water conservation measures. So there are two kinds. You can have soil and water conservation measures that utilize locally available materials, boulders, brushwood dams, local vegetation. I mean, what is the vegetation that is available around you? Or you can have cement and rocks. This is not to say that one is good and one is bad, but we seem to have a preference for cement and rocks over all other methods. We are not experimenting enough with it. So, which is why we have to rely again and again on mitigative measures or any other measure for that matter, which in the long run end up being unsustainable. Ensuring this again is another policy objective, ensuring effective mechanisms for identification, assessment, and monitoring of disaster risks. The Kerala policy also speaks about hazard risk and vulnerability analysis. Both the national and state policy talks about hazard zonation maps. In Kerala, we have our hazard zonation maps for all kinds of disasters, and it's all up on the website. But how close are these maps to the affected people? It's something that we need these maps, no doubt about it. We need technologically sophisticated maps. They need to be updated. But these maps are not something that people can play around with. So, for instance, in disaster management, we talk about tools like participatory disaster risk assessment, which is actually a follow-up of the participatory risk assessment, the PRA philosophy and tools. Basically, these are tools that allow you to understand your own locality and the disaster risks in your own locality. But that needs a different kind of mapping and a different kind of participatory learning. It's a different methodology. How can we have these two coming together? Or how can people use these maps to enhance their own understanding of their own areas? So we have DM points at the panchayat, we have hazard zonation maps, but the affected person is not able to use this map as a tool for learning, for disaster literacy. And how do we bridge that gap? Establishing institutional and techno-legal frameworks to create an enabling regulatory environment and a compliance regime. Again, extremely critical and important. And the DM policy is very articulate. It says, environmentally fragile regions like wetlands, Western Ghats, coastal areas, and biological hotspots and rivers in the state will be protected from detrimental interventions by legal enforcement. So the policy is clear, but to what extent is this happening? Every violation that we see around us, to what extent are these violations being legally curtailed is a big question. The rule for the river concept, which came up after the Kerala floods. We all know the terrain of the state. It's a narrow strip of land bordered between the Western Ghats and the sea. There's no wide expanse for rivers to flow through, except in certain patches. So possibly our wetlands will give us the room for river. So what we are now doing is all our wetlands are being systematically converted. So there again, there is a need for a relook. Because on the one hand, the intent is clear on policy, but in its implementation, we need far greater vigilance. This is again extremely critical, mainstreaming disaster management into the development planning process. Again, it's a high order task because again, both the state and the national policy very clear about this. The state policy says the new approach emanates from the conviction that disaster mitigation and preparedness should be built into the development process and it should be multidisciplinary. So how do you integrate disaster risks into development planning? At every panchayat level, at the district level, at the state level, this means that every development plan needs to look into the amount of disaster risk that could be generated if this project comes through. So one needs to critically evaluate our development plans. And I think looking back, during the 70s and 80s, there was so much of debate on the whole term development. And you know what development is and what it does and what it does not do. The whole limits to growth argument, growth versus development. And finally, now we've, post 2000, we've, sustainable development and SDGs have come in and kind of captured the debate, but we are no longer questioning this development pathway. I mean, everything is couched in terms of SDGs and SDG goals, but the process is still, it carries on business as usual. So, I guess the increased frequency of disasters is giving us one more opportunity to reconsider this development pathway and to, generate public debate and imagination about what is the development that we need. Is this the kind of development that we need or not? And interestingly, the National Disaster Management Plan of 2019 says the unfortunate fact that DRR, which is disaster risk reduction, mainstreaming has remained somewhat improperly understood or vaguely interpreted theme by both decision makers and practitioners is a weakness that needs to be corrected. So basically, it calls for larger societal involvement in this whole debate, is what I feel at this point. Now I come to the aspect of recovery. Several phases in the recovery process, reconstruction, rehabilitation, all of this is part of the recovery process. And the recovery process is the most difficult, one would say, because it's long drawn out. The hype has moved out. Everybody's forgotten. And, what is out of sight is out of mind. But the recovery process is, painful, and it takes much longer for people who have been affected by disasters. I don't know in India whether we have any successful model of recovery. But what we have in Kerala is not too promising. I go back to the tsunami rehabilitation sites, which we've been visiting quite regularly over the past few years. This is from Alapad. 20 years since the tsunami, and there are several rehabilitation sites. Basically, they're called tsunami colonies. So you have standard box-type houses, all on 2 to 3 cents of land. The land itself is located on marshy land, so it's flood prone. It's like your toilets are unusable during the monsoons. Livelihoods are questionable because the affected population has been moved away from its original area of residence, so you have to travel further to go fishing or to pursue whichever livelihood you were pursuing. The designing of the rehabilitation sites, this again has been seen in many other places as well. You have houses and that's it. There's no space, common space for rituals or for recreation, for older people to sit somewhere. And the social stigma that they grapple with. So when we went to this area, the person who was taking us to the colony said, please do not ask for tsunami colony, because they are tired of hearing this. They're viewed as colony kare. So they don't want to live with that stigma. And this again is something we have to be wary about. What do these lessons teach us in terms of the long-term rehabilitation that we will be rolling out in Wayanad? The Uchakada flats in Korattur Panchayat of Trivandrum. Basically, these flats have been built under the Punargeham project, where houses, fishing households, relocated from the coast due to coastal erosion and sea surges, are then living in flats. So there are 128 flats in 4 blocks. Several issues are there, but the one big issue is that when we build a flat complex in any urban area, the first thing one will do is to design a waste management facility. But then why is it not done in a rehabilitation site? So there was at least till 2 years ago, I don't know if anything has changed in the past year, I would not know that, but there was no waste management facility. And so it led to a lot of conflict within the residents. The waste was dumped at one corner, and so the flat that was immediately near that waste dump suffered, and they were always at loggerheads with those. But the others didn't have any other option; they had to keep their waste somewhere. No designated spaces for washing, parking vehicles. So the washing stone, the stone on which you would wash your clothes, was on the topmost level, above the 3rd floor of the flat, 3rd or 2nd floor. So when they wash, the ceiling would become damp. So that again was a cause for conflict. So what I'm pointing out is these are not small issues. They are basically design issues which could be corrected if that planning was taken up with a little bit more of care. We went in and we saw that in the built-in cupboards, the clothes inside those cupboards were damp because the walls were damp. This was 1 year after completion of construction. There were issues with the location and the access road. The access road was steeply sloping and coming up again. So elderly people couldn't walk in. They always had to hire an auto when they went out to the PHC or to the bank or whatever. Again, these are the instances or the examples of rehabilitation that we have around us. And we must learn from these so that we don't repeat these when we go in for a much, larger and more complex rehabilitation process. Another thing that deters recovery is the prolonged stay in the relief camp. Relief camps are supposed to be for 45 days, but when you end up staying there for 1 or 2 years, then your recovery process is severely inhibited. I take two cases following the Kavlapara landslides. The Katibaniya community, a particularly vulnerable tribal group, PVTG, who are entitled to special governmental provisions, were affected. And about 32 Katibaniya households were relocated in this two-storied Panchayat auditorium in Pautuvalli Panchayat in Malappuram district. They insisted that they should be relocated at the same site. So they had to wait a little longer till that land could be found out. I think the non-tribal residents were able to relocate earlier, but they were not living in this particular auditorium. 2 to 3 years later, 12 families continued to remain. There are several reasons why they remain there. Of course, the time taken for building the rehabilitation site was definitely one factor. So this prolonged stay came in the way of their recovery. And in another very interesting case, in the Anakam landslides in Thrissur, near the Vayachal, Chalakudi region, again, the Kadar community, again a PVTG community, their hamlet was washed out, but they were not happy with the site that the government had identified. So they went and identified another site, which they felt was more suitable. And they decided to move in there. So because they are forest dwelling tribe, the earlier location, they had been given that land under the Forest Rights Act. So here again, they would have to be given land, taking that into consideration. The land that they occupied falls in 2 forest divisions. So there is the division boundary that goes between that settlement. So they still haven't, the government has still not been able to clarify that confusion, so they still don't have title deeds. They've been living there since 2019 or so, 4 years, 3 or 4 years, but they live in temporary, they built their own houses with bamboo, using their own indigenous knowledge. But since they were together and they didn't lose out on their social networks, they all built one big shed, they lived under that, and they built 23 houses, which are temporary. It's a strange situation. They don't have legal acceptance, but the panchayat also knows that they're living there. The panchayat is not against it, but this legal issue has not been sorted out. So the panchayat gives tarpaulin sheets that kind of protect their roof a bit, but there is no drinking water, there is no electricity, and so on. 2 different cases. They kind of took this way out, so they didn't have to live in the relief camps for long. They're living at their own will in a different place, despite the struggles. In a way, slightly better than, I suppose, the Katipaniya community who had to live in the relief camp for 2 to 3 years. I mean, there are several factors, but this just tells us how this life in the relief camp can be very problematic. I think in the whole rehabilitation process, one thing that people who go through this don't have is access to information. Access to information about the whole rehabilitation plan. What is this plan? How is it going to be implemented? What is the budgetary allocation? In fact, when we went to the Uchakada flats, we met a young girl. She, I think, had completed her post-graduation and she was looking for jobs. She told us, can you tell me how much money is allocated for this flat that I'm living in? So it's basic information, but she doesn't have that. So I think this kind of information, yes, this is the amount that is allocated. This is what that is given to you. And very interestingly, in the Kavlapara case, which I forgot to mention earlier, the Katibaniya tribals, this was, soon after the 2019 landslides, it was 2020 and there was COVID. So the money for housing came into their bank account. So did some other allocations like COVID relief. Some of them had lost family members. They got that kind of compensation also. They did not know what was the total amount of money allocated for their house. Also, possibly being tribals, they were not conversant with this language. They may not have followed it up. We don't know the reasons. But finally, when they built their houses, they didn't have enough money because they had exhausted it in other ways. They did not know this was the amount that was for your housing. So they ended up with houses without kitchens or toilets because they ran out of money. So those who could take loans took loans and built a kitchen. Those who didn't, couldn't. So this level of information is required. And we need to understand, we need to think about how we can communicate this information to people from different diverse cultural backgrounds. They may not understand it at one go. We need to develop that language to communicate. Yeah. Our past experiences with rebuilding. Also, there is a lot of debate about the proposed amendments to the DM Act, the bill, and also whether rehabilitation can be viewed as a right. Is it an entitlement? Is it my entitlement to get a certain kind of rehabilitation if I am affected by a disaster? We have the 2013 Right to Fair Compensation and Transparency in Land Acquisition, Rehabilitation and Resettlement Act of 2013, which is basically those who are displaced by development projects now have a right to land acquisition and to rehabilitation and resettlement. Are we thinking of, don't we need to think of a similar paradigm for disaster affected people? Because the point is that however much we may not intend to, it's couched in the language of relief and charity that is there right from the time we begin sending relief material. Sahayikanam is right. It's important to be compassionate, but everything cannot be seen from this point of view. So just like I have to wait for clothes to be given to me, I cannot wait for everything. And I cannot go on asking for everything. That reduces my self-esteem and my sense of dignity, which has to be, which cannot be compromised upon. And that I think it's a neglected part of the recovery process. And we need to pay more attention to that. And so how is this? We had an interesting conversation with a person who's a volunteer in the relief camp in Mepadi. So he was saying that there are a lot of clothes in the camps. There is no dearth, there is no scarcity. So he encountered instances where a person who's coming, who's just got to the camp, he's given one set, one shirt and one pair of clothes. So then he was saying that, so why can't we give them a little bit more? It's like they have to come and ask again for the next thing. He says that why can't we keep it there and ask them to go and take what they need? Why, see, in every act, we need to be conscious of what is being communicated. So the way in which relief material is given also, communicates or conveys a certain thing which we should be careful about. And yourself, you or me in that position, it could happen to any of us that we lose everything and we are in a relief camp. So all of that also needs to be thought about. And that again is an important part of, finally, accountability to affected populations. This is a framework that is being developed internationally as well. Who is accountable? The people who are affected. And how do we ensure this accountability? What are some of the critical factors? Transparency, definitely earlier. Proactive disclosure of information. It needn't be asked for. It should be put up. Participation of the affected people in decision-making processes, and it is not easy. Participation, like sustainable development, has been much maligned. So in that ladder of participation, what kind of participation are we envisaging? Is it citizen-led participation? Where is the citizen in this whole process? Feedback and grievance mechanisms, again, very, very important. If I have a grievance, I should have a platform where I can file that grievance, and I should have that trust that, yes, this grievance will be addressed. I needn't be close to somebody in power to get an answer. I should get it. So, so the ability to file grievances and the response that you get, and continuous monitoring and evaluation, third-party monitoring and evaluation, and social audits of the entire process, so that it is transparent. I think all of these are extremely important in ensuring the entire quality of the recovery process. I'll stop with these observations and take up discussion. Thank you.
So we've had two really, expansive kind of presentations. Dr. Kuriakos took us through what happened, in a very vivid kind of way, and raised some of the challenges that we face. And Jyoti took us really through the policy environment that we have. I mean, the details of, or the framework of policy. And also brought in this whole area of rehabilitation, etc., which we haven't actually dealt with so far, I think, in the lectures that we've had. So that was new in terms of what we have been listening to. So I just want to flag a few questions before I invite questions from the floor. Dr. Kuriakos actually left us at a very critical point where he said that it's no longer going to be about early warning systems. It's got to be about land use, right? Moving people out and so on. And Jyoti actually took us through some of the programs where they have been moved, but some of the questions that come to my mind is, do we really know that those are safe places? If it's marsh, then is that a safe place? And to Dr. Kuriakos, do we know what are the disasters waiting to happen? We know now about this particular disaster, and so we can go back and say, yes, they were given early warnings, etc. But as the state, do we really know where are these disasters? Because last 5 years have been one after the other, right? So what kind of thinking really has gone into that question? So maybe both of you can, along with that, I'll take a few questions from the floor and then one round of questions. Yeah, so.
Reply to this and then come to your questions, or we
If,
listen to all of it? And
what would you like to do?
I think I'll react to
Yeah, okay, fine. Great.
this first one. We were the first state in the country to notify COVID as a disaster. That was 1 month and 23 days before government of India or this country realized that this is going to be catastrophic. Reason is we are in the watch out of this. There is a set of watchdogs that we have, and we all daily eat, drink, and live disasters, and rather sleep disasters. Every time it's that what we do. But is that enough? Probably not. And that's where I'll call upon what Dr. Jyoti was also mentioning. It's a community which has to realize what they will experience. For example, this year, in the beginning of this year, we notified heat waves in the state. In 2016, when we looked at the data and notified heat wave on a particular week, there was a huge lot of criticism from the official weather custodians saying that Kerala wouldn't have heat waves. And the same custodians were forced to notify heat wave in the beginning of this year. The reason is that there are systems that are in place, and the systems learn through certain past experiences and know-how that know-how that exists in certain databases. But that's not what we are facing anymore. We are facing things that are so extreme. The magnitude of events are so extreme that this was never experienced by the civilized community of Kerala before this. You spoke about 5 years. No, the entire shift in the weather patterns in Kerala was getting to unravel itself from 2012, when we had a 100-year return interval drought. On that year, Shastamkota Lake had 1 more week of water to be pumped for Kollam. And we managed it by doing all kinds of hook and crook, pumping in water from Kallada to Shastamkota Lake so that Kollam city wouldn't dry up. You all probably who are from Trivandrum would know that some years back, we pumped water from Neyyar to Arvikara to feed Trivandrum city. There was no water. we provided the funds and designed the project for it. So there is a lot of things that is in its way to us. Number of zoonotic diseases. Yes, we saw Nipah in the whole world in the last 20 years. Kerala alone had active Nipah emergence repeatedly year after year. Kala Azar, Wayanad is known for a number of zoonotic diseases and they being inherently there. So these are things that we need to be really in the watch out from a bottoms up perspective. There is no mechanism at the central or at the state which is all knowing. There's nothing like that. We get to know when people get to know. We get to know when certain sensors detect it. We get to know when certain surveillance mechanisms detects it. Which is the best surveillance? And that's why I said the best sensor is a human, is that community themselves. And that is why I contrasted between what happened in Velanadu as against what happened in Wayanad. As she said, yes, everybody is now focused on landslides. No, we are not just focused on landslides. So the reconstruction process is looked at from a resilience building perspective and not from a perspective of just recovering what they lost. There has had been one round of public consultation. The lessons from that has been taken into in the designing process, and one more round will come, wherein we are making micro plans for people. So every family, there's a micro plan that's coming out. Kudumbashree is doing that, and then with the micro plans, we'll approach how two aspects more. Yes, we have 37 designed shelters in Kerala, 17 of them along the coast, 7 in Idiki, in the landslide prone areas. Couple of them in Calicut, where again landslide prone area. Why are we not investing probably more into these shelters? People speak of Orissa as against Kerala. No, Orissa has 10,000 shelters. Yes, Orissa has 10,000 shelters, but less than 20,000 schools. Kerala has 30,000 schools and maybe 37 shelters. These schools of Kerala have kitchen. Every 20 student has a toilet because that's the education rules. And nothing stops KSDMA from taking over any facility that is available in the vicinity. You saw that in the times of COVID, we took over everything that was available. So that was also some possibility that we have. And if you look at the number of shelters to be built, let's just look at the population density as against how many. 152 panchayats in Kerala are in high hazard zones. 152 panchayat multiplied by somewhere about 40,000 people on an average. To accommodate 40,000 people, you will need to build a building or part of it, even if it is 10,000 people in a panchayat, given these two experiences, 3 wards, 10,000 people each. So 10,000, if you look at, you are looking at a shelter which is twice the built area of CDS. If you go by the standards, look at the carbon footprint and the amount of infrastructure and reliance on natural resources that we'll have to make. Therefore, even when we build new shelters, we built it in school premises, many of them. Yes, some of them are in revenue land where it is used for other purposes, like Kadirur, where they use it as a women's gym. Yet another place, Mararikulam, they use it as recreational space for women. So many examples of that. But then, and we also support them with quite a bit of money as corpus deposit so that they don't have to go and beg for this maintenance costs. But having said that, if a community is impacted by a disaster, a major disaster, schooling is not going to happen there. It's as simple as that. There's no school that's going to work. Therefore, the school, if you capacitate the school and facilitate it with better facilities, like maybe more toilets and more waste management facilities, then school premises is the best and the most granularly available mass evacuation ground that we have. So that there is a perspective issue there. The resource that you have to have. One building will require half a mountain in stones to build. You don't have soil or the old sand available to build. Then if you look at mainstreaming, yes, there is funding mechanisms, all that is happening, but it is about internalizing it, it's about internalizing it. Let me put it this way. Do CDS have a DM plan? I don't think so. Every institution is supposed to have a DM plan in according to the DM Act. And it is not upon any of the authorities to tell you to have it, but it is upon you to create it. The reason is simple, because it is a statutory requirement of every institution to have it as per the Act. And we can't say that I don't know the law. It is not permitted in Indian judiciary.
We
So
just
therefore,
had an audit of all our buildings and all our, I
yes.
don't know if anybody here is on the committee, but yeah, so taking.
An
note of
audit
the
is one
risk.
thing as against a DM plan. An
Yeah.
audit is a structural safety problem.
Yeah, that's.
That only looks at how the structure behaves and whether structure is safe. And for that matter, this room is not really safe. But then a DM plan is about institutionalizing it, internalizing it with funding mechanisms. Now, if you look at the DM plan of Mepadi or Vanimel or the 1034 panchayats that we did a complete SWOT analysis of all of those plans. And there's a report also in our website if you look at it. Many of these local governments are too good at identifying problems. Some of them are good at also coming up with their own local solutions for it, but majority of them don't know how to solve a problem. Mepadi, as against everything else, had an opportunity there. They have MSSRF right there. MSSRF contributed to making these a better and more enriched DM plan. And these DM plans were not prepared by anybody else but they themselves. No, SDMA, Kila, all of us were just facilitators training few people, and then we pulled back. And I was very clear in that, telling Kila, Joy Almond and me took a stand that no, we will be facilitators. We give you the maps, you take it to the ground, you look at where you want to relocate people, you look at how you want to do it. You want an input, you ask us. So we facilitated with certain people on the ground to facilitate it. But beyond that, it was all done by themselves. Some of them have done very good. Mepadi is one panchayat which did a wonderful DM plan, but it was a previous committee. The new committee used it for certain response activities, but didn't internalize it as a mechanism to fund mitigation projects with their own funds. And when we started doing this, inverting the pyramid of disaster management from up top to bottom to top, that happened only in 2019 when we started with this that Nammal Namukai big campaign. Then we also, through the planning commission of the local governments, the 14 planning commission chaired by Vijayanand sir, there are page number 100. If you go there, you will actually see the clear subsidy provisions for disaster management, wherein the panchayats were told that you should keep projects for disaster management, climate change, and biodiversity, and you can use funds available by yourself or on your development funds, in double quotes, development, how they foresee it. So mainstreaming has happened. Where is the gap? The gap is in internalizing it and realizing that we have to act.
So I think that's a really crucial issue, and one that you mentioned in the earlier round also, this whole issue of the difference between the two sides, right? Those that had experienced disasters internalized it because it was very much within memory, but the others did not. Now, to turn to Jyoti, you mentioned that all of these panchayats have disaster maps, the plans are there, or at least I don't know how many, but at least some of them do. Dr. Kuriakose also mentioned that they have been formulating the maps, but they've been used for different purposes. Now, given that, how is it possible to use those to actually communicate? I mean, we can't expect a community to go through a disaster before they internalize this, right? So the challenge then is to use these tools that exist to internalize what you call internalize. So can you say something about that, given your experience?
Yeah, I think as Dr. Kuriakose was saying, all panchayats do have DM plans. Are these plans panchayat-centric or community-centric? The plans are prepared by a certain set of people in the panchayat. Not everybody can get involved, and it's not practical either. But how then do we take these plans to at the community level? That's a very long, arduous process. Holding dialogues and conversations at the community level will not happen at one shot. Just one Gram Sabha in 6 months will not do. It's a long-ranged education process. And that's, one needs to invest time and resources and energy and money in it. Otherwise, that internalization won't happen, because how did we internalize all of that we're talking about today? We came through a process. Don't we need to give that time and process to communities? And that means that's why I was referring to this citizen education. It's a very long drawn out, but you cannot shortcut, you cannot bypass it. Without that, it will always be agency driven by decision makers, bureaucrats and others, and in certain NGO sectors and some civil society. That will be confined to that.
So it's interesting because maybe like we did have this decentralization campaign, right? It's a Kerala-wide campaign, which did bring certain institutions into place, whatever their flaws, they were work in progress, it's taken time. But is it really time for that kind of movement at the local level for disaster planning?
Let me put it in one
please
sentence.
raise questions. I don't see any hands up. So
I think
I'd like-
somebody raised hands. Yes. Just one answer, one line answer to it. Yes. In Janagiya Sutranam, we spoke about building roads and building infrastructure and making social life more safe in that sense, with a lot of investment in those sectors and social development per se. Now, probably if there is a massive campaign, that massive campaign is probably about bringing down some of those infrastructure that we built from places where they are not anymore needed. We have to, and that's why I said we have to decide where we want to live, and where we don't want anything to come up, just leave it for nature or use it for agriculture. I'm against talking about creating permanent fallows. I always wish that human beings have toiled centuries to kind of make some land fertile or livable, and therefore it should be used for some other activity of humans. Therefore, maybe agriculture. I'm just referring to agriculture because that's the easiest to connect. But that campaign shouldn't focus just on disasters. It should be much more broader in terms of how we want to adapt to climate change. It's not about disasters. Disasters are just few speckles in a year. Maybe 20 days we will face some rainfall and some heat, and that's it. But there is a slow killer, a thing that is amongst all of us, which we don't realize is affecting all of us mentally, physically. And if we don't react to that and start becoming resilient to it and adapt to it right from now, book your tickets to Mars. That's my answer to it. I mean, just book your tickets to Mars. There's no other way that we are going to live here.
I just want to point out that, though it is true that Kerala has, schools that double up as shelters during disasters, I don't think we should. I'm looking at school education and what's happening to school education, and I've been specifically looking at schools which have which have been used as shelters for a significant part of the year in the coastal areas in Trivandrum. I think it's high time we start thinking otherwise, because the education in these schools are seriously affected, and the users of these schools are usually the most vulnerable, from the most vulnerable social groups. And the other point, of course, is we have a lot of infrastructure in Kerala, which is in the private sector. Maybe some kind of legislation we need. For example, all these wedding halls, huge structures with bathrooms, with kitchens, all the facilities that you mentioned. There should be a law that actually allows the government to make use, some kind of building laws that insist that these huge structures should double up, should have, say, a stock of tents and other necessary things, maybe mobile toilets and other kinds of facilities, so that they can be doubled up instantly as shelters for affected people. Obviously, it is in the private sector, and so it's not going to be easy, and they will have issues of compensation, etc., will have to be taken up. Yeah, but I think we can do all that. Affecting it's the saddest part is that the schools in affected
These kinds of disasters tend to happen in areas that are ecologically fuzzy and inhabited by people with considerably less resources. The schools there serve precisely those kinds of children. And then we use the very same schools for long periods for purposes other than education. So, I feel that there should be a rethink on those grounds. So even if we are not going to build shelters like Orissa did, I think kernels of those shelters already, if you just travel the highway, just count the number of wedding halls, massive structures that already exist.
One, we don't need another law. Already we are empowered to take over. We did that in COVID. Yes, we had to grapple a lot in the court later with compensation and all. But aspirations of people in Kerala are different, man. Orissa, the shelters are a hall, a big hall, and people would just come there. Maybe it's cyclone 2 days to 7 days, they go back, or they're going into some other facility. But here in Kerala, not more than 8 people are permitted in a room in a disaster affected place. So it's 2 families or 8 people in a classroom. Yes, within the halls, yes, we have a list of them, but not all halls are satisfying this requirement because many of them have terracing within it to facilitate this kind of view. Only few have flat floors wherein you can actually partition wooden people. 3, our community doesn't like to live like that. If you interact with them, they will say, we desire privacy. Then tents, if we come to tents, if we deploy tents, and 2018, we did deploy tents in Alapi. They didn't live there. You know how we circumvented that? We brought in houseboats. So 1 or 2 families, we gave houseboats.
When we talk Malayali population, I think there are Malayali population is not equal in terms of aspiration or facilities that we already enjoy. So I think disaster that yeah, you're right. In Alapi, we all saw that. People come on to establish habits. I don't think we should have those kinds of sentiments. These are, you're not right to say. That who said? I mean, we get moments where they're going to pick up whatever. But in some sense, our subjectivities also need to change, And these are moments of learning as well, for everyone. So I don't think the government should be expected to, provide every little bit of convenience during what it would be primary safety, definitely safety, the prevention of any possibility of an epidemic or something like that. So, and what I was meaning to say that each of these halls can potentially be turned into some. You're right in saying that many halls don't fit the criteria, but they can be. And there can be a law which insists that if you want to build yet another wedding hall, you better ensure that it can be turned quickly into a shelter whenever necessary. So our social infrastructure needs to be rethought, is what I'm saying.
Let's talk about it in the local government department. I'll flag this.
Okay.
Dr. Shekhar, I don't know if, it's a very basic doubt about landslides. Perhaps this has been already discussed in previous meetings here. I'm not sure. There has been this argument that, quarrying creates these vibrations which destabilizes slopes. So you say the quarries in this the landslide affected region were 10 kilometers away. So is it possible that these will create such vibrations or whatever they are, which destabilize slopes? Not just quarrying, but similar, high impact construction and so on.
Yeah, just back to that question. I think when the incident in Wayanad happened, I think if I remember correctly, local MLA even had this moment during some television debate. I quite clearly remember him mentioning the same thing, like is that a possibility? Like this, the vibration argument again. I don't know the legitimacy. I just thought I should mention it.
One, if it is a blasting type of quarry, which used to be the way that quarries were, they use dynamites in the past. So there used to be dynamite sticks and they would blast it. So if you go to these minor mineral quarries, you will see boom, a huge blast and everything coming down. That used to be, and flinder rocks would travel 20, 30 meters away. There are instances where it has traveled 100 meters away and have dashed into a house and demolished it. So I've personally inspected many. But quarrying quarrying started with humans, human life. We started this when we were kind of really grappling with the Stone Age. And ever since then, the whole process of quarrying had also evolved. Kerala was a late entrant into modern techniques of quarrying. And for that, we took a great lot of pain. In 2016, when we published our DM plan, we had clearly mentioned and put in a restriction that if it is a high hazard zone, you cannot have a blasting type of quarrying there. What interestingly happened was that there was a lot of litigations against us in the High Court. We won. We didn't fail any of those. But this forced the quarry industry to convert into a new quarrying technique called nonal blasting. All of you, if you have studied in schools in Kerala, and I was an active Shastra Sahitya Parishad person when I was a child in the school, what we used to do is, there used to be this little science magazines which teaches us do all kinds of naughty tricks with whatever is available at home. And one of these things used to be to take out this chloride from the matchstick, make a small hole in a wood, put it in there, and just prick it, and then it'll burst. When it bursts, the brick will break or the wood will break. And we used to notoriously do it in all school desks, mischievous children. We would love to destroy every single bench that is available there and desk, because you do that once in a year, you will have somebody coming and kind of rubbing it and making it more pakka. So you get a fresh bench and a desk. And therefore, we used to do this notorious thing. Similarly, nonal blasting is the same. If you it has a blast radius of felt vibration of less than 10 meters. So you blast it, only that portion of the rock is kind of feeling it. It's very small, microscopic blast. But they also circumvent this sometimes. What they do is they have hundreds of nonal blasters triggered at the same time. It's because while the quarrying technique, the blasting technique has changed, the one who is blasting, the blaster, is not trained for it. So now when disaster manager looks at this, we also insist that you have to have a nonal blast certified blaster to do the blasting, because they will not do it. They will blast one row, then the second row, then the third row, so that the vibration is confined. It is true that vibrations of blasting, large blasting, can propagate through the rock seams if it is a continuous rock. But within this rock massif that we looked at Wayanad, it is called Camel Hills, and Camel Hump Hills don't have any quarries anywhere within that formation. So there is no propagation of any quarrying activity elsewhere into this structure. So quarrying as a technique has improved. There is also a water cutting technique, which is not really used in Kerala. It's slightly more costly. And there is also manual cutting. You all look at Greece as a beautiful tourism destination, right? Everybody cherishes to go to Greece. Just outside all that you see in the pictures are some of the largest marble mines in the world. And Greek marble is world famous, and they mine like anything everywhere. They do it by cutting, because that rock you can cut. It's a sedimentary rock and you can actually cut it. But that's not the case with the rock that we deal with. These are hard rocks with a lot of structural planes which will break. And therefore, you need harder methods of breaking it. There is also chemical blasting these days that they do, or chemical breaking which they do, which is even more expensive. So slowly that industry is evolving. What we don't still have in the state is that no, these are the areas that you can mine. And when you identify those mines, there is also a scheme of the right to rehabilitation, where literally these mine owners buy them out, everything around it, and move people out. They buy out the land and then they mine. Here we don't have that kind of quarries. The big quarries that the biggest quarry that you would see in Kerala is probably less than 10 acres. But the real mines does it like this. So we should really look at areas which could provide material to the state, because without that material, you cannot have good roads and you cannot have good buildings. And on the other side, there should be areas where even if there is rock material that you see as beautiful rocks, oh, that is mineable material, but we shouldn't permit anybody to mine. That differentiation has to come out over time. Drastic reduction has happened in quarrying. 3,000 and odd quarries were there hardly 5-6 years back. It has come down to less than 300 now. But that also affects on the other side of reconstruction, of maintaining the social infrastructure that we have built, the public infrastructure that we have built, because every time you want to mend it, repair it, extend it, you don't have enough material to do that. Sustainability is a problem there.
Yes.
On the basis of their diversities. So, disasters, happens, we can see that socioeconomic so you say this kind of discrimination issue.
Usually and generally within Kerala, wherever UNICEF or UNDP has come and evaluated most of our shelters, for example, when 36 lakh people were out from their homes in 2018 floods, UNICEF had done a complete survey across Kerala, went to all relief camps, looked at what was there, and they said they have never seen such camps where people live in harmony. That is not because that we do something strange in the camps to make it like that. No, Kerala's social fabric is so. But that wouldn't mean that there is disaggregation, and there is also certain kind of exclusion that happens. For example, transgender community had faced certain issues. So we started a transgender inclusive DRR program to circumvent that. Here, when we did the PDNA also, we had a consultation exclusively with the transgender community. We have one on persons with disabilities. One of those people whom we tend to ignore is persons with disabilities. Their needs will never be catered. So when the camps of Mepadi were being run, the first floor, whoever had disability issues, they were provided with facilities on the first floor of the schools. Most of the schools had 2 or 3 floors. So these are consciously taken care in Kerala. Maybe 1 or 2 instances you will hear or there or here. But there are also the other side of it. For example, Punjirimattam had 2 large tribal colonies. None of them wanted to come and live in any camps. They didn't want to come and live in camps. They said, no, we are happy, we are safe here. Don't disturb us. If you want to give us something, give us food material, and we will survive here. And they were safe, they were rather safe. There is also something interesting from what you spoke about in Kavalapara. I was personally involved in that process. The tribal community was also offered 10 lakhs, and they are actually eligible for 12 lakhs. They decided, no, we want our forest right. Now, the issue is within forest, to identify a dwellable piece is very difficult. The reason is, the moment the tribal community goes and sets its shop in a particular area within the forest is full of elephants and tigers and whatever. All the animals there will also start interacting with them. The traditional dwelling point where they were is a seasoned area where they already know which are the animals that would come near them, which are the animals that are around them, and who would transit. Elephants usually take transit routes, so they would know what they will face. But in a fresh area, that will not happen. So identifying that piece of land which perfectly fits them is difficult. 2, they didn't want to take this money and build themselves. 2018-19 floods has a difference from what we are trying to do here. And tsunami, I have a slightly difference of opinion in the way that we look at that colony. I'll explain that later. But 2018 and 19, our declared policy, which was published in the newspapers as full page advertisements, also in the High Court we had submitted, was owner driven reconstruction. The only condition that we kept was in those who are building in Alapi, in the R block and all that areas, has to build in stilts, for which we facilitated additionally. And when you look at tsunami was actually an eye opener for this country. So there was no disaster management that way existing at that point of time. It was all ad hoc, doing this, doing that. But what went missing in tsunami rehabilitation, and most of these rehabilitation, is the fact that the state is assisting a community which is impacted, right? And yes, it is a right. There is a right-based transfer and there is also a compensation-based transfer. So a right-based transfer is what you are entitled under the state disaster response fund. For example, if I die, my family will get 4 lakhs. If my house is gone, if it is Antilla or if it is a hut, I will get 1,30,000. That's it. That's what the country can provide you. But beyond that, everything is supposed to be coming through your insurance or state's benevolence. State has to mobilize money from CMDRF or wherever people, all of us have to contribute, and some money has to come in. That's the only way that it works. There is no minting of money that will facilitate otherwise. But once you create an establishment and an infrastructure, for example, in the case of Wayanad, if it is a township or if it is tsunami colonies in double quads, once built, the community should have also been empowered through an institutional mechanism to sustain that entity. What happens in these reconstruction projects is that once something is built and offered to the community expects that even if it is one leakage in my plumbing line, the state has to come and fix it for you. This dependence and this perspective of always depending on the state has to also change. Otherwise, this will not work. You buy a flat, you go and buy a flat in a flat, and then thereafter will you ask the builder every week to come and mend your plumbing? No. You will have a flat society, a community institutional mechanism which will cater to that. Unfortunately, most of our disaster affected community, if you look at historic, such instances, you will see that they all tend to be dependent on the state again and again. Maybe that had its own reasons. I also, this being an academic forum, I also think this way, that the state and the polity had a need to make them dependent. Many a times when you look at these colonies, I have felt it myself. When I go to these colonies, sometimes I feel, no, there was enough space to do it like this. Why was it built like this? Maybe that the system wanted them always to come back to you. But that has to go away. We have to create a space where they can run their livelihood happily and they can live and sustain themselves. So if it is a township that is being built now, we already discussed about it in the morning today with Chief Secretary, that it needs to be having its own kind of administration, which will facilitate and take on continuous needs that the township will have. Not that the state will come in every minute for mending the roads and putting paint.
Just to add, it's correct that this dependency syndrome shouldn't set in, but the institutional mechanism also has to be put in place. That again has to be done. Otherwise, it ends up in this dependency. Yeah.
I think the tsunami colonies never had any institutional mechanisms. I looked at all the files, and the first thing that I asked was, who was to maintain this? For example, all the shelters that we built has a shelter management committee. We gave them 18.5 lakh as a corpus fund. The interest of the money of that money goes to the shelter management committee, and they can rent it and lease it for all kinds of activity, and whatever money they make again goes into the corpus fund, and the interest is something that they can use for ordinary repair. We call it ordinary repair and periodic repair once in 5 years. For once in 5 years, the local government has to pitch in money. But that mechanism was built in, and anybody who is logical will do that. But if you look at the tsunami colonies, nowhere in files, I mean, the files runs into hundreds and hundreds of pages, and nowhere I could find anybody talking about having an institutional mechanism to kind of manage a so-called colony that is built. Yes, these are lessons that we learn about.
Thank you. Ayana?
Yeah, hi. So Dr. Jyoti was mentioning about rehabilitation as a right. So when it is like a one-time large-scale event and having a lot of noise, we address it as with like an all-made approach. Like we announce rehabilitation package or program. So, but Kerala also has a lot of slow onset disasters. Like we are a coastal state, sea level is rising, and there are a lot of areas that face waterlogging and like if you account 3 4 months in a year, disrupting their entire lives. So how do we address that from a disaster management policy framework?
Do you want to add to it? I think that's a very interesting question because one-time major disaster versus slow onset disasters. I don't think I have an answer for that, but I don't know whether we are sufficiently sensitive to the crisis that the second set faces. Seasonally vulnerable. So they're not permanently vulnerable. So their right and their entitlement and their stake becomes even more complicated. I think in terms of policy, our policy needs to take account of these diverse realities. And though we have an overarching policy framework, we need to have contextual solutions to such cases, is what I can say at this point here.
I'll just add one line to it. Flooding, for example, we call it 1 in 10-year floods, 1 in 20-year floods. So there's a probability to which we link it. 2018 floods, and this is a story if some of you eventually would become policymakers, and how much insensitive we can be once we are in a power seat is something that I want to narrate here because all of you are youngsters and you need to know this. 2018 floods, when we were drafting this 10 lakh vulnerability linked relocation plan extension, and actually we started it before that, 2018, before the major flood struck, we had this policy laid out. Dr. Thomas Isaac was very instrumental in getting it cleared for us. And this Punargeham that you heard was also part of that whole concept. When we started with this process, there was somewhere about 700 to 800 families who got impacted. I think you need to. There were about 700 to 800 families who got impacted and who didn't have pata land. They were not entitled land. So naturally, when it came to our notice, we drafted out and said, no, this facility, this scheme should be applicable to those who didn't have pata land also, because every disaster is an opportunity, because there's a lot of money that is coming as aid, and we could effectively use this to also relocate these people to safer places, and they will get a pata land and they will get a proper housing. No, so their long time dream of having a pata land and a housing will come like this. They are not dead in the process, they are living. And why would we want to kind of retain them in Puramboku land? I raised this point in a high level meeting, and somebody who was very key from the bureaucracy was furious at me and my boss when we raised it. And we heard the statement that you guys want to give land and house to people who shit in the river, they should be thrown out of that place. And this is an opportunity to do that. So the opportunity itself was defined differently by that person. And we were a bit stuck and disturbed by the statement. I walked out of that meeting. I said, no, I'll not sit here and listen to this crap. And our Honorable Chief Minister stepped in. He said later, this was taken to his level, and he stepped in and said, yes, we will extend this to people who are in Puramboku land. Thus, Kerala is the only state where if we have a disaster affected area, if somebody is there without pata land title also, if there is a rehabilitation, that scheme applies to them also. It was ordered, and there is an order that we got out only because that this was raised in 2018 like this, and we had a very bitter fight for this. Now we can become very insensitive on why these people really went into these non-titled land. They didn't go there deliberately, right? They went there because of our inefficiency as a system. So yes, this is something that I wanted to mention here. You must realize that these kind of things will come up in front of you on your face. If you think that everybody is highly educated, no, some are not.
Disaster Management Act is recently amended. And is any initiatives for amending Kerala State Disaster Management Policy? It was in 2009 because the national and state policies are not listed academic institutions as a stakeholder in disaster risk reduction.
One, policy is not going to do any good. Even if you list out all academic institutions and say, no, all of you should do this or that, nothing is going to work until, again, it is internalized. If only you internalize, this is going to happen. And internalization has to happen from the heart, not with the brains. Two, I have very serious criticisms on how the act is being amended. The act has certain elements that would probably strengthen few things, but the spirit of the act has not improved in the context of climate change. We had great hopes 4 years back when the draft was being circulated, and a lot of us, the old timers in DM for last 14 years or so, in the system had wrought out a lot of things together. And we placed it before NDMA. NDMA was very happy to take it forward, and it was taken to the government of India level. But unfortunately, a lot of that didn't materialize. It became only a very skinnish exercise of polishing it for the purpose of polishing and creating some new institutional mechanisms, and God knows what it is going to do. Because it's not lack of institutions that really doesn't deliver. It is because of a lot of other things where, like she was telling, educating people, going down further, mechanisms to do that, having a more fluxy framework of how we could work. So all this is what is more serious, which is not addressed in that. Yes, 2009, the state policy it's high time that we have to amend it. We have written out few things, but that's where I said, no, CDS can work with us. If you have your interns come over, work with us, come up with opinions as to how we have to modify it in the current context of climate change and resilience building in that perspective as well.
Hi, I just wanted to know how are these mitigation projects, etc., financed?
We have a state disaster mitigation fund from 2012 onwards. We were the first in the country to really have it. Although the act in 2005 itself told that it has to be there, nobody created it. Now, Government of India has also started funding into it. You know about Operation Anantha, which happened in Trivandrum city, a big, massive urban flood mitigation project, the first in the country to be used through urban, through disaster management. Yes, we funded it out of SDMF. That was one of the biggest projects that we took up. Some 30 crores we invested. That's why you don't walk on dirty water for more than 1 hour of a intense rainfall in the city center. Otherwise, you will be neck deep water. That used to be the case until 2015. Now there is a very clear format on how you can access that funds. And there is also a small grants window. So there are research projects also that is possible there. We have funded recently, 2 weeks back, we have funded Center for Water Resource Development on a flood modeling project. It's not just hard science projects that we can fund. We can also fund rather humanitarian science projects as well. Policy formulations are also fundable. There is no issue with that. There is a format for it. You have to apply it with that format, and it has to come to us. There is an appraisal committee. When it comes to academic research, we also give it for blind review. So there'll be blind reviewers that we choose, and they give in inputs, and it might take a little while before it is cleared. But there are also large structural projects that are funded. 10% of that money has to go into non-structural projects. That also we take care. So the soft solutions that she mentioned. For example, it's wise if some of you are interested, you should go to Narbona. There's a coastline in Punnapura in Alapi, where there is a very good bioshelter of casuarina trees. You know how it came up? It came up as a outfit of the tsunami rehabilitation project, wherein one forester there who is from that area internalized it to himself and also to his community. He took this saplings and he gave it to every household and said, you plant this, you water it. They planted it, watered it, and now you can see a beautiful casuarina belt there, which prevents the sea from taking out all this beach. And the water there, which was once brackish in the open wells, is sweet because of this casuarina belt. So these kind of projects also we do fund, and there are people who have internalized it. There are some good examples of it. There is one panchayat which is in Kasargod, where again you have to go and see it to realize what it does. I'll just tell you the name of that panchayat. Yeah, here. Very interesting one. Veliyavaramba. Veliyavaramba has created a casuarina belt, a mangrove belt. You know why they did that? It is a small strip of land. And but for this land, that panchayat will not exist. So they had to do it. They were pushed to the walls. Once you are pushed to the walls, you become very innovative. So the whole community actively participates in doing this process of planting casuarina trees and taking care of mangroves and having this little strand line canals kind of maintained so that if water comes in, it has to flow back into the sea. So all those strand line canals are maintained. So they do it. There are some places where our local governments are far more innovative than the best of brains sitting in Delhi or Trivandrum.
My first question is to Dr. Jyoti. You mentioned about the particular case that the woman was reluctant to move because of the livestock that she had. So I'm just wondering, like in your first slide, first point had 3 steps: mitigation, preparedness, and then you further. So what I feel is and I would like to hear from you how this mitigation process also has to speak with the livelihood scenario, not only in case of just a disaster, but as he pointed out, the social fabric and the economic fabric. So how would disaster management department interact with livelihood department? And I would also bring in the tourism department, because in the last panel discussion a lot of talk was about tourism, so livelihoods do play a important role. So that was one question to Dr. Shekhar. My question is about, you have been putting a lot of emphasis on internalizing. So many of us do some kind of research which bring in social norms, and we then end up thinking how social norms change. So then how would you talk about internalizing and bringing the cultural change about thinking of rehab, especially when you pointed out that historically that place had settlements, how the plantations developed. So it is not in and recent developed. So there are two segments of settlement. One is historical, one is new development. So there the idea, okay, we have been here, but we have to move. So how practically we talk about internalization in as in the if we go to the public domain, so that
Yeah, that's true what you pointed out, that, our preparedness, our mitigation measures need to link up with the livelihood issue and with several other issues as well. Actually, many of these objectives should speak to each other. And I think we don't have a department for livelihoods, but we have, NRLM and livelihood missions and so on. But I think livelihoods of the most vulnerable, one, are more dependent on the immediate natural resource base. In many cases, the immediate natural resource context is very important for livelihood security. And these livelihoods are multiple. They don't have one single livelihood. It's a basket of livelihoods that they would fall back on, and so it won't fall into any single package solution. We need to appreciate that. that kind of an understanding and appreciation needs to come from the side of policymakers and decision makers also, I think. And only then will that culture of preparedness set in. And I think, I mean, though the question is to Dr. Shekhar, just my comment on it, I think this internalization has to be more collective than individual. It has to be systemic, which is why, you know, there is that Casuarina belt in Punapura, which is good. But then it should not be because one person took interest. It should come up as a systemic response. Only then can we, buffer ourselves against this huge crisis. Yeah.
First is about livelihood. I told you they have one perennial income source and there is this peak income source. Perennial is agriculture, coffee and cardamom. The houses there on an average was 800 square feet. So they're not small houses. There were a couple of houses which were roughly about 2,000 square feet in this Churalmala. And Mundakai had on an average houses of about 500, Mundakai and Punjirimattam, about 500 to 800 square feet. Why? Perennial income source coming from coffee, cardamom. Even going to pluck cardamom paid good. You go to pluck cardamom, you and me cannot go and pluck cardamom. You need to know which is that right seed to pluck. So that's a skilled labor and that fetches good money. And these are not large farmers, large holders. They are small and marginal farmers. Small and marginal farmers are those who have about 2 hectares of land, maximum of 2 hectares of land. Even a 10-cent fellow will have coffee and cardamom. So that's the perennial income. Then comes the peak income, which comes from tourism and its allied industries. So think of you having a house there. 2 rooms you will spare for tourists to come and stay. You might cook for them 1 time a day, but rest is cooked outside and brought. So there is another family which is living on that income. So they have an income from cooking and feeding this tourist. A driver, there are hundreds of cars that got washed off, jeeps also. Why? The drivers and vehicles which were facilitating these tourists. That's another income. I have a cow, I milk it, I give it to my nearest neighbor who has a homestay, and he makes tea for that tourist there, another income. So this basket of income sources are available to these community, and that's why they wanted to intensify urbanization there, right? Why would they otherwise go and have more buildings there and people would move in there and buy land? Only because the peak income was contributing more and more to their economic well-being. Children, families living abroad, coming in only for vacations. You would have seen in the news also about one person who lost his son, who just came from Middle East. So there are all that kind of people that it was a small Kerala there, it was a small Kerala there. So when you want to connect livelihoods to the people there, or when we rehabilitate them, or in any place, if we want to skill them, skilling can be one on what they were doing earlier. But when I went to a town in US a few years back, there was a very interesting thing that I saw. This Ellicott city, you can actually look out. Ellicott city. Ellicott city is like this Churalmala. The city is in the plains. There are few mountains there. It keeps on bringing in torrents. And Ellicott city started as a place of milling, wheat milling. So every household actually has a portion of it sitting on the torrent. Why? The torrent will move the spinner and that will move the grinder on top, and the mill would churn wheat flour. So this is how they lived, and they preserve it as a showcase thing for people to come and see. But it has moved from that livelihood into a more modernized livelihood of service sector and all other. Every year, repeatedly they get this kind of major flash floods or landslides coming in and killing people. 1, 2, or 3 gets killed. So at some point of time, FEMA decided enough is enough, we'll step in. So they came in and they decided to look at how to revitalize the MSME there. Why were people not going away from it? One, because they had this nice attraction of their old mills. People would come there to see those mills. That itself was a revenue. Two, this mills used to be on the road front. So they were running shops now and people were making money from the shops. So they put in an MSME consultant there, full time, to tell these people and educate them and facilitate them with loans and all that facilitation to change their previous livelihood of just selling their old cultural remnant as an item to make money, but instead move into more matured and more secure livelihoods. And they were also assisted with a risk pool, a funding mechanism which feeds to them if there is another catastrophic event. We are already starting to work on a risk pool. Dr. Raviraman did a very detailed report on that, and the state is now has commissioned a study. Another 2 months, we will get the results and we will go into that instrument of risk pooling. Internalization. Do you have insurance? Life insurance? Medical insurance? How many of you have? Look around you, how many have? Just look around you. That's internalization. No? When you ride a scooter, sometimes you will just ignore wearing helmet. Why? My head is made of steel. The other is a human. His head will crack, not mine. For that one moment is when probably that you are going to end up being hit. It can only come from burning experiences or a continued education. No? It will not come otherwise. Velangad community internalized it because they faced it. Mundakai had historic experiences of disasters. In 2019 and 20 and 21 also they faced landslides. But none of these landslides came to this level, this magnitude. So they said, oh, it will go through the torrent. It will be within the river. It breaches the river bank. That's that one moment, that one moment. So to internalize, like she said, there has to be a lot of ways of internalizing it in terms of pushing and inculcating this in the community. It's not easy. I don't know whether we will have one solution for all this. No, maybe multiple solutions. But we need to keep trying. This is a cycle. It will never end. It will keep on going. And the cycle is getting faster. That's my problem. We are not able to catch up with it. Every time we rebound, by that time there's another one. This is not the case only in Kerala. This is world over. You go to Switzerland, you go to Italy, you go to Netherlands, everywhere.
We had this post-flood 2018. So have you done any kind of post-flood resilience or disaster management, especially for the cooperative societies? When you talk about handloom, I was looking for handloom. I am interested to look at that.
Ma'am, our primary agriculture cooperative societies are probably 2,000 times more resilient than any of us and even the state. I'll tell you why. 2018 floods, they constructed with their own profit 5,000 houses. There's only one primary cooperative society, which is a small netting weaving facility in Kollam, that approached us asking for any assistance. Nobody else came to us. Only one. Whereas they came forward with a project called Care Home, some of you would have heard, and they started building houses and facilitating. When state was giving 4 lakhs to build a house, they were building houses of 8.5 lakhs. Their own profit, their own operating income. But on the MSME sector, we did. We had about 6,000 and odd MSMEs, starting from petty shops to small industrial units that got impacted. So we came up with a project, and that is because of my learning when I saw in US that this was needed and this was possible. We did a small work in Pandanad, where there was a severe flooding here. There's a small petrol bunk. We went and looked at the fuel consumption rate there. Prior to floods, there was some level. During the flooded days, there was nil. And once we started the cleaning drive, it skyrocketed and went into 2 times the previous consumption. So everybody was baffled. Why? Can any of you tell me why the fuel consumption in a petrol bunk suddenly skyrocketed? Sorry? No. Dispensation. So dispensation of fuel was higher. You know why? All the heavy vehicles came there to clean up. So they started taking out fuel from the pump. So their graph went up. Same was the case for eggs and milk. So the MSME revitalized because of the cleaning exercise that we triggered through local governments, wherein funds were provided to local governments to trigger it. Two, at the state level, we created a loan mechanism, a soft loan process called Ujjivan loan scheme, Ujjivana Vaipa Pathati, wherein we said up to 10 lakhs, any MSME can take a loan. We will give you 2 lakhs of interest subvention for the 10 lakhs that you take, or we will pay the bank this 2 lakhs as your margin money, whichever you want. Sometimes the bank will say you need 20% margin money. So we give this 2 lakhs, they will get 10 lakhs. Or else we tell up to 2 lakhs, we will give you interest subvention. So the first year they will pay more interest, and remaining years, maybe 1 or 2 years, it will be softened up. So somewhere about 1,800 individual MSMEs took this and revitalized. So we have tried doing this, but I think we need to also have more MS consultants in the local area. Here, I spoke about Fazila. I don't know whether I spoke about her here. 3 of our Apta Mitras, Sensil, Unaf and Fazila, who were from this town. Fazila herself is an MS consultant of Kudambasri in Churalmala, in that Mepadi Gram Panchayat. So she is now helping her colleagues who lost all their resources, all their MSME activities. So she is now developing. So there is this kind of MS consultants that we have to bring in at some interface through maybe NGOs, CBOs also, because we are only talking about a petty shop owner who was selling milk and 2 padams will have to do only that again. No, maybe he can do it with a small truck. No, the truck will have a bit more of sophisticated, dispensation units, which will make them feel more confident in running a better life. Like yesterday, I heard about a coffee vending machine on a truck here in Kavadiyar. This guy went to US and he saw this truck and he left his job in Middle East. He came and started a coffee vending truck here. So beautiful. I mean, I went to see it. I just went to see that truck. I didn't have coffee from there. I just went there, looked at how state of the art, impressive. This guy came here. It is his design. How? Because he had to go to US to know that. But can we not actually transcend our petty shop owner here at the street and make him a bit more resilient and give him a more polished MSM? So for which we need probably some interface mechanism.
Long and very, very interesting, very, I think a fairly comprehensive session. I'm wondering why you didn't have coffee there, but that aside.
I went to see him, how he was doing his business.
That gives me a sense of uneasiness. You didn't have coffee there.
No, I just went. I occasionally do this. Go to these shops and look at the shop and see how people come there, buy things. So there's a spatial behavior, and there is also a behavior in space. There are 2 contexts to it. And if you go and stand there as an agnostic third person, you will start seeing all this theories really in front of you working. So I like to do that with particularly small shops to know seating happens in a room. This was one of my exotic work when I was in Madras University. You will not find some of these seats preferred by people who come here as audience. They will
yeah.
only sit there if they are forced and without their.
Yeah, I'm constantly forcing them to do that. Okay, so I think we've really had a really interesting session. What I want to say at the end is like this whole issue of internalization, there's no getting away from a project of education. And that's a project of education for everybody, because we are all in the face of climate change, right? And so there's no getting away from that. And that has to be a collective kind of education. But, you know, the bright spot is all those interesting projects that people in the face of calamity have come up with. And there, I think I'd like to invite you to collaborate with us at CDS, you know, to understand what these different kinds of projects are. We have a local self-government unit here. We also are doing some work on disaster management. So beyond the internships, I think we can also do other work really to understand and then maybe evolve some kind of program of, you know, getting back to the local level with context specific, because each of these will have to be in their different contexts. So what works in Wayanad will not work in Kasaragod and so on. So we need to really put them together. I mean, I don't know how many people know that there are these interesting and, you know, very appropriate kind of interventions happening in this context. So I'd like to invite you to do that with us when possible. To close, I'd like to thank both our speakers who brought in very different but also intersecting dimensions. I think they added to each other's points. And so I hope we are going away with less trepidation and more hope. Thank you.